Hi, I'm Nicole Papiano-Lugara from Your Instructional Designer, and I'm here today with Toddi Norum. Toddi, can you tell me a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, actually, it's been an exciting ride. So I started my career as a tech writer, and I think that's where a lot of folks in learning and development actually start. Um, we get involved in projects, I think, that take us down the path of not only looking at what someone needs as far as documentation, but what they need in training. And so I'd have to say that kind of that dovetail is really how I ended up getting in training. I worked for, oh gosh, it's been probably 15 years as a documentation specialist, developing content for usually like changes in software, a new product, a product change, implementation of a new version, sometimes, documentation for testing for new software. So I always really liked the software realm, but then I went to work in, gosh, back in 2005, 2006 for Raytheon. So Raytheon being the big defense contractor, primarily based out of New England, which is where we were living at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I started doing more documentation of like really large scale military systems and what they called mil standard spec writing, which basically means that you're creating these 300 and 400 page pieces of documentation that someone might use, say if they're on a ship and they need to, like fix a piece of equipment or something. And so I always really liked that. But typically you're getting content from subject matter experts and SMEs and not really working with people. So that was the piece that I really missed. And I had an opportunity in late 2006 to join the training team for a very singular product, which was a high altitude camera sensor used by the Army and the Marines in Afghanistan. It was called the Raid Tower. There's bigger versions of it. There's versions that are on
Mm-hmm.
balloons. I mean, it's just essentially like a theater camera system that alerts people to anything that's out there. Maybe a bad guy in a truck, think SEAL
Mm-hmm.
team kind of stuff. um, so I got to be on the training team, which was really awesome. And I didn't know a dang thing about it, nothing at all. I had a really good mentor. I recall she brought in a book that I love, and it's basically called Rapid Instructional Design. It's in kind of an old school book, but it's still a really applicable book to what we do. And so she taught me a lot of the terminologies. It's like at that point, learning objectives from the perspective of a trainer are very different from the objectives that you set out when you're doing documentation.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to really understand more of a performance learning objective and how to write those and how to do, top level terminal learning objectives and enabling objectives as far as the training tasks and things like that. So I found I loved it. It was just it was my thing. So I was there for a couple of years doing that with the military. I had a clearance, and then I ended up getting headhunted by iRobot. So
Oh,
iRobot, the
yeah.
company that makes the vacuum cleaners, the
Uh-huh.
cat videos and the vacuums. They also had a military division, and so their military division was making and do like reconnaissance and bomb disposal.
Wow.
So I recall the call that I got. Still, it's kind of like chilling to think about it. It was one of those phone calls where the job was described to me, and then I said, you know what, it isn't iRobot, is it? And the recruiter said, well, yeah, that is exactly who it is. And she's like, how do you know that? I said, well, because Raytheon had done some work in the past with them, and I remember reading about some of the things they were doing. So I was all over that. I instantly said yes because I thought, what a cool opportunity. And at the time, I know that I didn't have necessarily the full skill set to come in and manage large scale development like that, but I just said yes. I'm like, okay, we'll figure out how this goes. And I went to work for iRobot as essentially the counterpart to the military training folks in the TRADOC office, which is the training and doctrine office. And I worked under 3 PhDs in instructional design who were the primes at Boeing. And I always tell people this was the master's that I haven't finished yet, but I got that while I was working for iRobot. So I project managed 3 years of development of like on the ground training for key personnel in the field. But then I also developed the interactive multimedia instruction online, which was, was a piece that we put out on SABA. They use SABA for the LMS. It was a prerequisite set of training that soldiers would take before they actually got to the classroom, just to get them familiarization with systems. And it was just like, it was the coolest job anybody could ever have, seriously, because it's like my kids were, well, they were relatively small. I think my daughter was 7, and I volunteered with the STEM programs that iRobot had in place, which was bringing the robot to the classroom. So it was cool because my kids thought I was cool.
Yeah.
I used to do a lot of really cool work, Fort Bliss and Fort Benning, and I'd get home, the kids are like, "Well, 99's home, but you can't tell us what you've done." But it was great work, and about 2012 is when essentially Congress said we're not going to purchase any more of these things, and so I started learning more of the back end development phases, because I had a team that did development at that point. So I recognized that my big gap was that I had never actually done any true development. I'd never touched an authoring tool. I'd never script. So I dovetailed into doing more contract work, so I could really learn those skill sets, which was awesome. So, over the years, I've been able to work for the MOOCs, edX, wrote the documentation for those systems. I've been able to develop content for RSA, the security company. I've just really had a kind of a charmed life in terms of instructional design, and I ended up meeting some more of my peers, with some peer groups and some groups that are more oriented toward professionals. I'd say probably in about 2012, 2013, then I started really getting involved with finding out, what others were doing in the field, because there was so much stuff I didn't know about. Virtual reality training that was happening, which, by the way, we actually did that with the iRobot products, and at the time I didn't know that it was considered alternate reality or virtual reality. So, I was doing these really cool deliveries and had a name that didn't really apply at the time. We were calling them simulations, but they were really virtual reality. So that's kind of like my weird journey into training, and it's a field that I just dearly love. There's never a dull day. There are some days where you just want to beat your head against the wall because you're doing those typical deliveries. It's like somebody says to you, "I need this by the end of the week," and you're like, "Wow!" That would be typically a 2-month delivery in most companies. So there's a lot of that goes on. But at the end of the day, it's like, this is great stuff. I get to do new things every day. I get to learn something different, and I don't know that I would ever switch to anything different. I don't know if that answers the question. It's a very long answer. So,
No, it
I did it.
does. And it's amazing that you've had all of these different experiences. And so I'm definitely wondering, how do you think all of that time developing 300, 400 page documents is not something I would say most instructional designers actually have ever had to do. But I feel like that has to inform your work in some way that, a perspective that we don't all have. Like, how did that transition work? Like, was there anything you took away from that you feel pulled really well into
Yeah.
instructional design?
Well, one of the things I think is I used to have like this small document that I had written called the care and treatment of SMEs, subject matter experts, because they were the most valuable people that I ever worked with when I was doing documentation or training. And it's essentially like I had this bizarre policy when I worked at Raytheon where, I'd keep a little candy dish on the desk. And, if I found out that somebody liked one particular type of candy more than another, I would actually put that in my desk, in my candy jar, just because, part of the difficulty in getting really good information and having that validated and verified for the use for the end learner is to get someone who cares enough to say, okay, this is right. Or, I'm sorry, you've got those 2 procedures flipped, you need to flip them back around or it's not going to work, that kind of thing. And that's information that, as the person who puts together the materials, you're never going to know that unless you have a really good subject matter expert to help you develop your content. And I know I definitely learned that early on, working in documentation. I recall sitting inside of an office with a guy that was a PhD in astrophysics, I think. Really, really smart man who, at the time, helped me figure out, just some basic hacking techniques to be able to test some of the scripts that I was given. This was part of a manual that we put out. And so there were actually some scripts, this is in the way back, where, just to make the connections, to set up the software, someone had to run a script. And I remember being in the test environment and not really being very comfortable with that. And so John's like, okay, here's how you do this, and he'd get out his pen and his whiteboard, and, he would go through and instruct me on things. And I remember learning a lot of hacking techniques from John,
Hacks
how
are
to paint
helpful.
something. But he was one of those subject matter experts that, you could just, and of course everything's so different now, but I could just knock on the door and just say, hey, John, do you have like 2 minutes? I promise it won't take any longer than that. Can you tell me, is this correct? And, he'd be like, all right, if it's not longer than 2 minutes, I got it. And I'm like, all right, we're good. So, it was just a relationship type of back and forth that I remember finding to be the most important part of my job. I was a great writer, a really good editor, very good project manager. I could divvy that stuff up and put it out for review and do the peer reviews and run them and take all the content comments in, and, but that subject matter expert is the most important person you will ever meet in any job. So be nice to them.
Definitely. I mean, we can't knock on their doors right now for most of us, but
Yeah.
it is definitely really important to build those relationships.
It is. It's also important to value their time too. And, if you can get an answer or a validation from somewhere else, to at least take that 2 or 3 minutes to say, okay, is there somewhere I can find the answer rather than to borrow someone's time when they may not really have it. But yeah, no, it's a transferable skill for sure. So.
Well, I was going to ask you what your one piece of advice for, people who are interested in the learning field might be. Would you say that's it, or do you feel like there's something else that you really think folks who are new to our industry should think about?
Yes, there's a characteristic I think about everybody in learning and development, and that is curiosity. We are, I think, a really curious group just by what we do. And so actually I've been mentoring a couple of young and new instructional designers, and I always tell them, you know what, be curious above everything else, because the more you ask questions, the more you try to find out what tool sets are out there. The more you're going to find in this field, and the more you're going to probably open yourself up to others who are in the field who want to talk. So I think I call it a job hazard that, number one, we're curious and we do ask a lot of questions. And I think we're almost like those 5 whys types of people, right? We ask the question and then we're like, okay, but why? And you get the next answer and you're like, all right, that kind of tells me, but why? I'm sure that Simon Sinek would think that, as a career field, that we're probably doing the right things, when it comes to asking the questions about why. But curiosity, I think, is a big part of our personalities. And I think as a group, we care more perhaps than, say, others in other industries about whether someone gets it or understands what we put out. It's a personal pride thing for most of us that what we do is usable or good, because it reflects on us if someone can't use the materials that we produce, or if they're incorrect or they're boring or they don't execute. And so I think we actually really take an interest in what we do. Not all career fields are like that. Somebody in coding might have a piece part that they test and they move on to the next process, and they never know who uses it in the end. I think we're different that way. We're very close to the person who consumes our product. That also kind of prompts us to have a little bit of that design mindset too. At least I hope so.
Absolutely. So definitely, designers need curiosity and they need to like people.
Yes, definitely
Yes.
like people.
Like people.
And I think it helps to have a little bit of the design mindset as well too, to really think about, from the very beginning. And we always say, to start with a why, right? But also, what are you trying to achieve? What is the first goal of what you're training for? And frankly, to look at it from the root cause level, to say, do we even need training? maybe if we really look at a problem and we recognize that it's not a training issue, but, maybe more of an issue of how someone is finding their information. Maybe we just need to show them where to find information rather than to retrain them on a process. So, yeah, it's all good. It's really fun. And you do instructional design as well, right?
I do, yes.
Do you love it as well?
Oh yeah, I think it's a great field.
It is.
I came from a different background. I came from teaching, so I was like teaching college students English. My PhD is in
Yep.
English, not in instructional design, and it's nice to be able to make a wider impact. I think is one difference when you're shifting from like education, as in being the person teaching, to instructional design.
Right, exactly. You get to multiply yourself and multiply the successes. So,
Right.
and that's the kind of the difference I think between someone who is a trainer and someone who actually wants to take that message and make it bigger, and go into e-learning and delivery. So, yeah, but
Exactly.
it's an amazing field, and I think that the whole COVID-19 thing has really influenced our field. I think even more so than I thought it would. Because what we're finding is that our expertise is valued, um, and I think we're finding more opportunities to get in and say, okay, this is really what instructional design should do for you, and this is how you can best convert the content that you have for the adult learners that you have. Actually, I know of a group of, well, it's a mental hospital that does teaching on CE units that just recently met with an instructional designer out of Harvard, somebody who I guess in their mindset that Harvard person is smarter than the rest of us. And they may or may not be, but I give them kudos because they knew to take their learning content out to the world on a virtual platform, that they needed to contact an instructional designer, and more power to them for doing that, because not every group does that. They think that they can just port it out there, and I'm like, no, you really have to think a little bit more about how it gets consumed. So, and adult learners are different from younger learners, right? So,
Definitely.
so cool.
I think that's
Very
that's all really great advice. Like it's stuff that maybe isn't obvious when you're new to the field, but you definitely need to know it. I'd also be interested, because you just mentioned COVID, to see, a few years ago, I think the number for the e-learning industry estimates was like 325 billion. I imagine that's probably a higher number now, because I get requests like 2 times a week at least for some new e-learning project.
Oh, yes. Yeah, and I do too. Actually, I find myself having to say thank you. Nice to meet you. Let's stay in touch, because you don't ever want to say to someone you're too busy. But I
Mhm.
I am having the same thing. I get recruiters contacting me on a regular basis, and I know this has been a job hazard, I think, for me for a long time, because I really switched in 2012 to more of a consultant mentality.
Mhm.
And so, I would take on a project that was between 6 months and a year long, with the idea that I was doing this for me. I really wanted to learn, and I was doing it for the client as well, but finding that those were good opportunities for me to take on. Well, now I think part of what I've done to myself is I've created kind of this consultant mentality and a consultant persona. And so I get a lot of hits. And yeah, it's been like probably one or two or three or four a week. And, once or twice I'll say, hey, I'll have a 5-minute conversation with you. And other times I'm just like, thank you very much. It's nice to make your acquaintance, but, I'm super busy, and let me refer you to someone who I know is looking, which that's also part of the nature of what we do. I think we want to help those in our field. So, and I actually have helped a couple of folks find work who suddenly found themselves out of work after the whole COVID situation. So that's always a nice thing, is to know that that's just our mindset. I think is we want to see others succeed. I think that's true for most of the people in our field,
I
or at least
agree.
those of us who are out there, like kind of in the public. I think that's just part of what we want to see. So all
Definitely.
good.
At least my colleagues on LinkedIn. Everyone is very
Yeah,
nice.
definitely LinkedIn is the bomb. I tell people that, if you really want to find your way into a field and get to know the folks who are really doing things, and this isn't just thought leaders, these are people who are actually doing things.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to find most of them on LinkedIn. And I think that's true for almost any career field, but boy, we are out there. There's so many great postings in our field every day from practitioners, and some people who I don't know when they sleep. There's
I know
a couple.
exactly what you mean.
You probably know who I mean too. There's a couple
I
of
can
them.
think
I'm
of a
like, whoa,
few.
when do you people sleep?
I don't.
But it's all good. So
Well, Toddi, I really want to thank you for taking the time to chat with me
yeah.
today. You're one of, you've had such an amazing journey, and I think your experiences are really valuable, especially for folks who are just getting started. And your mentors are extremely lucky to be learning alongside you. So I just really wanted to thank you for being a part of the Learning Pro Intro series.
Well, thank you, and thanks for having me jump on with you. I'll tell you, I keep wishing the one thing I could have more time for is time to mentor some of the newer folks in the field, because I think, we all learn from the pitfalls and the mistakes that we make, but I think that there's certain things that knowledge at least we can impart to somebody who's new, to at least say, okay, don't go and spend, zillions of dollars on new tool sets. Go try them first. I mean, the things that we've learned over time, and frankly, I to go a step beyond that, I always tell newbies, I'm like, don't spend the money on the versions that require you to spend a lot of money. Get a job where somebody else is going to provide that license for you, because that's what companies do. They buy licensing for those software tools, and the software tools are very similar to each other. So if you learned one, you can, figure out the next one, right? At least we hope so.
I think that's good
Those
advice
are
too.
those are things. Yeah, I think that those of us who've made a few mistakes along the way have learned the hard way. So I'm always hoping I can help someone avoid those pitfalls. So
Absolutely.
cool. Well, it's wonderful to talk to you.
Yeah, it was great to talk to you too, Toddi. If you at home are watching or in your office, wherever you are, and you want to learn more about Toddi and the work that she does, you can check out the description box below, and there will be some great links and information there for you. But until next time, thanks for joining us.
All
Bye.
right. Thank you, Nicole. All right. Bye bye.